This is a product video for Inozetek's Dynamic Dry Apply PPF with a focus on how to apply its gloss finish line. And here are the details. Material type, TPU, thickness 7.82 mil. It comes with a top coat that has a very high gloss finish and is self-healing. The adhesive type is removable and repositionable, and the warranty is up to 5 years. And for more information, you can visit inozotekusa.com. And it's very important to note that Inozetek has a wide range of promotional materials that you can order from the website, including books that include large sample pieces of the Dynamic PPF line. Be sure to note the lot number that is on the outside of the box when you receive it. And to ensure the high gloss finish during transport and install, there's a cap sheet on it that should be removed at the end of the install. Also, to help ensure the high gloss finish, there's a PET liner. This should be recycled whenever possible. And because of the thickness and high gloss finish of the Dynamic PPF film, it's recommended to create a low-tack solution, in this case with water, shampoo, and alcohol. This can be sprayed onto the surface, which will allow the film to slide easily across it and ensure a pristine finish. Note that when the solution is properly made, it won't affect final adhesion once the material is squeegeed onto the surface. And when possible, when applying the film to the surface, leave the cap sheet on, as this protects it from scratches. And to remove it, first spray it with a light mist of water, then roll it off. This helps reduce static. For overlaps, when inlays and overlays are required, make sure that it's 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch wide, and always be sure to add medium heat over the overlap, then follow it with pressure to ensure a long-term hold. And note that even though the film is 7.82 mil thick, it's very conformable at room temperature when squeegeed with the right technique. This helps ensure a smooth install and no adhesive lines. If bubbles do occur, they can simply be pressed away by adding pressure. If the film is installed without a cap sheet, light scratches can occur. Thanks to the top coat, they can be self-healed with light heat from a heat gun or steamer. And always remove the moisture from the steamer with a high-quality microfiber towel. And it's highly recommended to avoid using a propane torch when installing Dynamic PPF, as the high heat can quickly damage the TPU film. If wrinkles do occur during the squeegeeing process, simply pick the film up and allow it to relax and go back to its original shape and tension. Reapply it to the surface and add heat and steam to fully relax the film, and the wrinkles will go away. When having to use cutting tape, note that the cap sheet should always be removed, and for standard knifeless tape, it'll leave a jagged edge, so this should be only used on non-visual edges. For visual edges, it's highly recommended to use what's called fine line. This means that the bottom layer is protected from the fine line on the surface. Then, with a good straightforward cut with a blade, the edge will be super straight. So for visual edges, use a knife. For non-visual edges, cutting tape. And note that Dynamic PPF is very strong and robust, yet if it gets overstretched, it can have a color shift. If this happens, simply pick the film up, allow it to relax back to its original shape and tension at room temperature, then simply reinstall. Now we move on to install protocol, and the recommended workspace temperature is between 60 and 75 degrees, and here are the recommended tools. Make sure that you have backups and all the tools are in good condition to ensure a professional install. We now move on to prep, and the first step is to remove the hardware. Make sure you remove enough hardware to ensure full coverage without overstressing the film during the install, and make sure to store the hardware safely for an easy reinstall at the end. After the hardware is removed, it's recommended to use an air compressor or steamer and flush out all the gaps. This will ensure that no specks of dirt get under the film during the install. Next up is cleaning, and be sure to wipe down the entire surface using a cleaner that doesn't leave a soapy residue behind. Next up is clay bar, which is absolutely essential to make sure that the surface is optimally smooth so it looks like paint. Then comes degreasing. This can be done with 70% isopropyl alcohol. Make sure you wipe the entire surface and put extra focus on the edges. When needed, place a squeegee in a microfiber towel and do a 360 on the edges to make sure that they're thoroughly degreased so the material holds for the long term. With the surface now fully cleaned, it's very important to document any damage with pictures or videos. The final step of prep is to measure the vehicle. Always account for extra bleed, left to right, top to bottom, and note that the material is directional. And when sectioning material, it's highly recommended to do it on a work table. Make sure it's wide and there's one section where the material can safely roll out. Clean the table first to ensure that no dirt gets onto the film, and because there's a cap sheet on it, it's highly recommended to roll the film out with the liner side facing up. This helps avoid getting any dirt on the liner that can be transferred to the vehicle during install. And some installers like to remove the cap sheet ahead of time. If this is the case, do so on the table and always be sure to spray it with a light mist to reduce static. And since there's no logo on the liner, always be sure when separating panels to mark the direction with the dry erase marker on the liner before taking it to the vehicle. Now move on to install protocol. We begin with large sections like the hood. Always be sure to spray it first thoroughly with the low-tech solution. Wipe it on evenly, then do what's called a focus degrease on the outside edges with isopropyl alcohol or a strong degreaser. Not only focus on the edges, but also any recessed areas. A good habit is to wipe down the liner one more time right before it's laid on the vehicle. Remove any excess film with the liner on. Then release the film from the liner, roughly halfway on the large section. Fold the liner under, then always start on a body line. This will help avoid any adhesive lines. One installer should hold the film lightly off the surface, then the other installer should squeegee it onto the main surface area with firm, overlapping squeegee strokes. Feed it into all recessed areas and then gently pull the film to the outside edge at one shot to create 100% glass, then squeegee. This again helps avoid adhesive lines. For the other half, one installer holds it low and flat off the surface just like the other side. Feed it into the recessed areas and gloss it to the outside edge. In this case, the hood was applied without the cap sheet. Therefore, it's highly recommended to go over the entire surface area with the heat gun on medium heat or a steamer. This self-heals any scratches, helps check for bubbles, and also activates the adhesive on the surface so it holds better. Once the material is applied to the main surface, this is very important to set the material up and focus on the corners first. Cut the corners once they're set, and then be sure to seal them firmly in place. Once the corners are set, when possible, open a section and continue to focus on the corners first. Using a butane torch helps the film soften on these sharp corners, then cut them flush right at the bottom and do what's called a butterfly cut. Add more heat from the butane torch, always being careful not to burn the film. Once the film is set on the corner, note that it should never be cut flush to the edge. The reason why is due to the thickness of the film, this can cause it to lift very easily. Therefore, the film should always be wrapped under roughly 1/4 of an inch around all edges. Be sure to do this in stages. Add heat to activate the adhesive before cutting, and cut with a very sharp blade, and always be careful not to cut too deep. Always make sure you seal the edge for long-term durability. For sharp body lines, it's recommended to make very clean and precise overlaps on the edge to ensure long-term hold. Now we move on to more complicated sections like the front fender, and if the material has to be brought farther into a car, one option is to place very precise inlays ahead of time. This helps ensure full coverage without overstretching the film. For hardware that cannot be removed, placing cutting tape on one edge is highly recommended, and for above the front fender as well for fuller coverage without having to cut it with a knife. Always make sure you put the low-tack solution on the main surface area first to avoid adhesive lines, then do that focus degrease on all the edges. For install, in this case, the cap sheet will be kept on, but spraying the cap sheet with a light mist of soapy solution will help the squeegee slide and glide on the surface. And with a big focus on adhesive lines, it's highly recommended to keep the liner on, pull the material low and flat in sections. This combination, along with keeping the cap sheet on it, will reduce adhesive lines dramatically. Work in stages and be focused. Once the material is locked on from side to side with a hinge, now work the material to the top and bottom sections. This should be done by making a series of very focused relief cuts at the body lines. These help relax the film onto the main surface area and avoid adhesive lines as well. Once the material is relaxed onto the top section and formed onto the surface, then the same protocol can be used on the bottom. Make relief cuts as soon as the film feels tense. Make it roughly 1 inch on the outside of the area being applied, and always cut 45 degrees away from the section being installed. With the material on the main surface, now the cap sheet can be removed. Always recycle the cap sheet. Then go over the entire area with moderate heat. This helps activate the adhesive onto the main surface area. Once the main surface has been warmed, allow it to cool back to room temperature, then focus on cutting. Again, begin with corners. Always be sure to cut 45 degrees away from the corners to ensure that no material bunches up top to bottom. Then in this case, release the cutting tape, add the butane torch to soften the film on the corners, then tuck it safely behind with the tucking tool. In this case, the material is being cut on the opposite side, which will allow roughly 1/4 of an inch of material to wrap behind the edge. First, form the corners, top and bottom, Then form the film behind with an application glove. Add heat to seal the edge. For tight gaps, like on the Fender flare, pick the material up and feed it tightly into the gap, then cut it away with a sharp knife. Make sure the angle of the blade goes behind the Fender flare to ensure that it doesn't cut the paint. Once the material has been cut away, come back in and seal the deal. For gaps between the front fender and bumper, it's very important to bridge the film over the gap, then cut on the opposite side. Due to the thickness of the Dynamic PPF, tucking the material deep into the gap can cause it to lift over time, so bridging and cutting ensures full coverage and long-term hold. For the front headlight that could not be removed, using the cutting tape ensures enough film goes behind it for full coverage without having to take it off. For the top of the front fender, the material can be cut away with the hood closed. Then, once the excess film has been removed, the hood can be opened, and the excess film then can be formed onto the inlay to ensure full coverage and no stress. We now move on to very complicated compound curves, like the mirror. It's highly recommended to wrap this in multiple pieces. Using fine line tape is recommended due to the visual edges. In this case, start with the bottom piece. This is a rectangle piece, and always be sure to note direction. Form the film onto the main surface area, tuck it into the bottom edge, and cut it away with a very sharp knife. Once the excess film has been removed, always make sure to come back and seal the edge with a tucking tool. And to remove the excess film on the body itself, use a blade and a very light touch. The fine line tape on the bottom layer protects the knife from going too deep. Remove the fine line tape completely and add another layer for the bottom edge. Add the low-tack solution onto the mirror. This will significantly help reduce adhesive lines. Polish it onto the main surface area and do a focus degrease. With the main piece now, make sure that it goes in the right direction to match the body. Start on the backside piece to avoid tension. Once the material is hooked onto the back section, form the film all the way to the outside edge. For complicated sections like this, it's highly recommended to install it without the cap sheet on, as it allows it to conform more easily at room temperature. Lock it onto the body line first, and then pick the film up and snap it onto the top section. And since the back is being wrapped with a separate piece, guide any tension to this area, as it'll ensure that no tension stays on the main surface area. To avoid any scratches, spray it with the low-tack solution on the main face as well. The soap in the solution will keep the film from scratching. Then it's highly recommended to add heat to the main surface area to self-heal any scratches and activate the adhesive. Once dried, add another layer of fine line on top of the bottom layer and cut away the excess film with a sharp blade, with a light touch. Once the excess film has been removed, repeat the exact same steps for the back side of the mirror. Cut with a light touch and work from a good body position to ensure that the blade angle stays at 10 degrees towards the surface. Once the excess film has been removed, now cut away the film at the top using a very short, shallow blade. Pull away with a free hand to ensure that there's even tension on the edge, then come back and seal it with the butane torch. The butane torch helps form the film onto the top edge so there's good long-term hold. For the backside piece now, place a overlay piece on top, take it to the overlap, and again make sure the overlap is roughly 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch wide. Remove the excess film after cutting, and then go over the overlap with heat to make sure it's activated. And note that when complicated sections like mirrors, bumpers, and door handles are wrapped in multiple pieces, when properly done, they look like one and they hold up well for the long term. Now move on to post-install, and the first step is to do what's called a 360-degree checkover on each section. Go over each section with heat and make sure that all the edges are fully sealed. The next step is to add edge shell tape for the front bumper, back bumper, and rocker panel on the underside, and then to reinstall the hardware. Always make sure to reinstall the hardware safely and make sure that it works. For aftercare, it's recommended to wipe the car down with a light solution of alcohol and water. This will help remove any handprints that were put on the vehicle during the install. And if using any aftercare products that have any kind of ceramic coating in it, make sure to test it ahead of time to ensure that it doesn't change the color or hue of the film. And note that when it comes time to remove the Dynamic PPF, it's highly recommended that instead of using a heat gun or a propane torch, to use a steamer, as this helps soften the film and ensure that it comes off in large pieces. And for more information on Inozetek Dynamic PPF, be sure to go to Inozetek USA or follow them on a wide variety of social media outlets. That concludes this product video on Inozetek's Dynamic PPF, proudly produced by the Rap Institute.